How can average working citizens like us, how can we reform our unjust financial system to erode the wealth and power of big banks, traditional corporations, and the super rich, and redistribute that wealth and power to average working citizens without relying on politicians or regulations? This is the question we ask on the Crowd Effect podcast. I am your host, Paul Lovejoy, activist investment advisor and founder of Stakeholder Enterprise. On today's show, we are going to be talking about vehicles of change. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, then most likely you are someone who wants to see our financial system reformed. The reason why that must vary. It could be that you've been working hard your entire life and have never really been able to get ahead. Perhaps you were a victim of fraud, such as myself, and you want to see reform. Maybe you see your parents working their butts off and not getting ahead, and you don't want that for yourself or for maybe your future kids. It could even be that you see the injustice between the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap, and you want to see reforms in that way. Whatever it is, to have reform, to have this change, we need a vehicle to bring that about. So, a vehicle of change is anything that will take you to what your desired result uh, is. So, it could be a method, it could be a program, it could be an object, an item. For instance, if you want to lose weight, your vehicle of change may be a diet, a program, a Peloton, something along those lines. Uh, so that's what we're going to be talking about: vehicles of change. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast, then you'll know that I've talked about crowd investments as a democratic vehicle of change. Now, how I got to this conclusion, well, it started off in 2016, where I was completely turned off with the foul nature of just the bickering and arguing amongst the general public. The politicians were bad, but that's kind of expected. The bickering and just the nasty nature, how Americans were treating one another, just based on your political affiliation. It was a total turnoff, and the foul nature of it drove me to look for another vehicle of change to reform our financial system. So that's when I discovered social enterprise, organizations designed to use business strategies to solve social and environmental problems. Now, in 2016, I was still in a bad place mentally, and I really didn't know what to do about social enterprise or really anything much about it. I did join the Social Enterprise Alliance. Not that I knew what I was doing or thought I could contribute to the alliance. I just wanted to support it in any way that I could. So after 2016, I started to work. I developed I was trying to work on improving my own self-confidence and regaining my self-respect. And I chose a vehicle of change with a series of books written by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it gave me the tools I needed to regain my confidence, my self-respect, and it put me in a better place mentally. So, when the COVID pandemic hit in March of 2020, um, I had just recently left my job at working for a wealth strategy company. I was 44 years old, unemployed, and looking to what's going to be my next move. What will be my next step? Pandemic hit. I have two young boys, and decided that I was going to stay home with them, um, and my wife would continue to work. Now, I got to say I'm very privileged and lucky to have a wife who is a successful pediatric gastroenterologist who really allowed me to think outside the box because there wasn't any financial pressure on me to get out and go support our family. So very lucky, very grateful to have her being able to step up like that. Not only that, it was a tough period for healthcare workers, especially in those early days of the pandemic. So I was staying home with the kids and looking for my next step, what I wanted to do professionally. And I began listening to podcasts at that time, and it was something that I thought I could do. I'll do a podcast, and I'm going to do it on social enterprises. So I began researching social enterprises, and a couple of months later, that the summer of 2020, I started to work on it and record uh, about social enterprises, and that's what I thought I was going to talk about, social enterprise. But when I started to do the research, not only did I learn about social enterprise, I learned about something called impact investing, which is uh, i- investing for not only a financial return, but social and environmental gains as well. And it has to be measurable impact for social and environmental gains to happen. So, measurable impact and a financial return. And I also learned about community development financial institutions. These are institutions that were born out of the ashes of the 1960s war on poverty. And I found this very intriguing. Um, War on poverty, a ton of money was thrown out to try and solve poverty in the 1960s. And they tried it for pretty much the entire decade. And there wasn't a whole lot of results that happened, and which it's going to take time to do. Poverty, the conditions for poverty, they've been going on for thousands of years. You can't just reverse something very quickly. But the public's willingness to spend all this money on poverty, it it no longer was there. They weren't willing to do it anymore, the public. And so when the funding dried up, all these banks and credit unions that were relying on funding from the government to maintain their operating expenses, well, they just went away. And it caused a lot of problems with just people who were unbanked before. They didn't have bank accounts. These are the vulnerable population, the disenfranchised members of our communities, and poof, gone. These banking institutions were no longer there. And the activists that were, in the trenches on the war on poverty, um, what they did, people like Clifford Rosenthal, what they did was they went from being activists, and then they became bankers, and they developed this. They realized that In order to provide financial services to the disenfranchised and vulnerable, they had to be self sufficient. And they directed all their efforts on a market based approach. Now, when I heard that, it kind of, wow, market based approach. That was one of the triggers for my own direction to help reform our financial system. So, market-based approach, and they continue to grow these banks organically, um, and credit unions, and in the 70s and 80s, they got a lot of funding from the faith-based community. Um, really supported them until they got a federal designation in 1994, where now there are yearly cash awards given to financial institutions that are self sustaining, and that are making um, real progress in their communities. And they get these cash awards to just really inject and make the change go quicker, and have a broader scope in what these financial institutions are doing. So CDFIs, incredible. I also learned about the circular economy, which was really developed by a sailor who was a world record holder. She sailed around the world faster than anyone. It was a solo sailing voyage. And this was 2004, I believe. Anyway, during her sailing voyage, she saw these whaling stations. Well, this was after her sailing voyage. She saw these whaling stations on these remote islands that were abandoned, and she was wondering, well, how many times can we just set up, extract all the natural resources from one area and move on? Not only that, when you're sailing around the world on a boat, the boat is your world, and you have to take all your resources for the entire trip. If you're sailing, there's no stopping to get the world record. It's You have to just always be at sea, constantly moving, and you need all of your resources. So she really developed a sense of finite. Ellen MacArthur is her name, Dame. She was awarded the title Dame, and so she developed this framework for companies to allow them to be not only environmentally responsible, but it actually improved the company's profits and lowered costs for their customers. So this was another market-based approach to for environmental reform. And I also learned about the certified B Corp community, and these are businesses that really promote stakeholder capitalism. So it's in their it's part of these companies' missions to look out for the company's employees, their customers, their vendors and suppliers, the communities they serve, the environment, investors and shareholders, all stakeholders. Um, need to we Companies need to have a responsibility for all the stakeholders, and that also was really empowering to see that there is a big shift in how businesses are operated and run. Um, so the market based approach, that was a trigger, and then the other trigger was impact investing. The problem with impact investing, well, first of all, it was started by philanthropists. These are wealthy people who want to promote social and environmental well being through charitable causes. And so these philanthropists, they donate a lot of money to different causes around the world, and they kind of invented impact investing, so they could invest and get a financial return, but also creating an impact. The problem was on impact investing, it was reserved exclusively for accredited investors, meaning you either have to have $1 million cash in the bank, make $200,000 a year for the last 2 years as a single person, $300,000 a year for the last 2 years as a couple. And this locked out the general public from participating in impact investments, with the exception of CDFIs. The general public could still invest in CDFIs. The problem is that CDFI investments aren't fantastic returns. The platforms um, have the three main platforms that you can go online today. They've never lost an investment dollar or principal, and provided modest returns. Now, past performance does not guarantee future results, but the CDFIs have done a really wonderful job to allow the general public impact investing. Now, working to that, what the really aha moment was seeing was having worked at a wealth strategy company. I learned that the general public could have access to this private market, which impact investments have, which have been the private market is reserved exclusively for accredited and institutional investors. And discovering that there is this back door that was made available in 2015 for the general public to engage in the private market via crowdfunding. So that's when it all came together for me. Okay, market based approach, social enterprise, impact investing, private market, crowd investments. And that's what led me to create this company that is dedicated to reforming our unjust financial system through crowd investing. And the crowd investing I saw as this just a wonderful, amazing vehicle to reform our financial system from many different angles. And so I will be continuing the story of the different vehicles of change, the different crowd investing vehicles of change that are currently reforming our unjust financial system. My name is Paul Lovejoy. Thanks for joining me. I am a crowd investor, and I see you are one too. If you'd like to know how to reform our unjust financial system democratically without protesting or divisive political action, go to my website, stakeholderenterprise.com.